Well, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel if you've joined me before, and a very warm welcome if this is your first visit. Well, it's halfway through 2023, in fact it's more than that because it's already July that I'm recording this, so apologies, I'm a bit tardy. But I really like this mid-year Freakout tag thing because I like the fact that it gives me a chance to go on my story graph and really reflect on the books that I've read so far this year, and also have a think about, you know, what my future reading might look like between now and just after Christmas. So without any further ado, I will crack on. So I think on the original tag there were 14 or 15 questions. I've narrowed it down to 10 because some of those questions weren't pertinent, for example, to my reading. So one of them's about best book to movie or whatever. And I don't think I've read any books that have, certainly not read any books that I've seen translated into movies so far this year. In fact, I don't think I've seen many movies so far this year, which I probably need to put right. But anyway, there we are. So, so I've whittled it down to 10 questions. And the first question is, what is the very best book that you have read so far this year? And I didn't even have to think about it, because for me it was Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, which I read some months ago and absolutely loved. A story of a father and two sons facing the grief triggered by the loss of wife, mother, and this crow appears in their lives and sort of helps them to cope, I suppose is the best way of putting it. Loved it. Love Max Porter, and yeah, don't know what else I want to say about it really. That is definitely the best thing. Oh, well, I suppose the thing I want to say about it most is that I think it's the best. If I've experienced grief, as I'm sure most of you have, and this, for some reason, this book really taps into how to cope with grief, how to deal with grief, being honest about what it feels like. Yeah, I think it's absolutely marvellous. Then next up, the best book by an author that I've already read. So last year, my favourite book of the year was a book called Marble by Amalie Smith, who's a Danish author, so I'm reading her in translation. And I thought that book was amazing. She's an artist, she's a writer, she's just quite young, I think, and just such a refreshing narrative style, sort of fragments, poetic, beautiful book. And also she has a deep interest, it seems, in the ancient past as well. So in Marble, the book opens with a corrie, which is one of those beautiful, very sort of static ancient Greek female statues from the 7th century BC. And it's narrating kind of from her perspective, and I just thought that was whoa. I mean, that bowled me away to start with. But then all sorts of other questions about sculpture and art that came into that book that I just thought were superb. So I have managed to get hold of Threadripper, which is another of her novels, and this did not disappoint either. I'm going to talk about it a bit more in my reading wrap up for the month, but it starts with Penelope and her loom and her trick, which Penelope was the wife of Odysseus, the greatest hero of them all, and she was left by him to go off to fight the Trojan War. He's still not returned after 20 years, and some years in, probably about, I think, I don't know, about 17 years in, something like that, a load of suitors appear on her doorstep. There's 108 of them. They all want to marry her. She doesn't want to remarry yet because she doesn't want to admit that Odysseus is dead. And so she says, well, okay, I'll marry you when I have finished weaving a shroud for my father-in-law. And she's very cunning. She goes up to her women's rooms. The men don't go into the women's part of the house, the Gunaikon. She goes up there, she weaves, and every night she unstitches the cloth. So after 3 years, she's rumbled by a sneaky maid, but that's another story. But anyway, it opens with that, and then goes into all these wonderful avenues about the power of weaving, stories of various people from history. I just thought this was utterly magnificent, and I was prepared to be disappointed, because sometimes when you've really loved a book, it's a risk, isn't it, reading the next book by that author. But this was just brilliant. Okay, so next, a new release that I've not read yet but want to. Now, this is something that I picked up, that I was given recently. I think it was in the Women's Prize Party goodie bag. And this is the list of suspicious things by Jennie Godfrey. And actually, I didn't realise, I don't think it's out until next year. But I just thought this sounded great. And it's a take, I think, on Thatcher's Britain, hence the milk bottles on the front. And I read the first few pages. And you know when you're in the middle of other novels and you don't want to start something else. But it really grabbed me. I think I'll come on to it quite quickly, because I think it's quite satirical and quite funny. It reminded me a little bit of Joanna Cannon's Trouble with Goats and Sheep, but I suspect it's doing its own thing. So yeah, a Thatcherian novel with quite a strong critical voice, I suspect. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one. Nearly dropped it. And then, okay, the biggest disappointment. Now, again, I'm not going to say much about this, because this is one of my July reads. July? Don't know how I said that. It sounded weird. Madwoman by Louisa Treger. I bought this when Simon and I were on our wonderful bookshop crawl up in Yorkshire, not that long ago, a couple of months ago. And I was very excited to read it, and thoroughly and utterly disappointed. But I'm going to whet your appetite, because again, I'm going to talk about that further. It was the writing style. I will say no more. On the surface of it, it should be an amazing story about a real live journalist, Nellie Bly, who became one of the first female journalists in America, and she passes herself off as a madwoman so that she can go into this awful institution that houses 1,600 mentally ill, or are they, patients, and she wants to expose it, and she wants to make social change. Absolutely my sort of story, but anyway, there we go. So my most anticipated release, yet to come, I think it comes out in August, is the sort of second instalment, I suppose, of Natalie Haynes' non-fiction take on females from mythology and the ancient past. And I think the next one, I think it's called Divine Might, but I could be wrong. And it looks at goddesses in particular, I think. So I am very much looking forward to that. Pandora's Jar, an absolute delight of just a fantastic example of how historical writing does not have to be remotely dry or dusty, and can be made in the right hands, can be made thoroughly accessible to anyone. I think Natalie is a genius at just that. Okay, so my biggest surprise, this was one of the books that I read for the Women's Prize, and there are a few more of those coming up. No surprises there, I suppose. But this novel, The Bandit Queens, I still feel bitter that it didn't make the shortlist. I think this is one of the most refreshing novels I read in a long time. It's about a woman living in India. It explores the caste system, it explores poverty, it explores widowhood. But basically, the village thinks that she has murdered her husband, to the point where she almost starts to believe it herself. And one of her friends invites her, asks her, beseeches her to bump off her husband as well, or help her to. And so this whole kind of quite bizarre chain of events unfolds. But it's such a wonderful story about friendship and about appearance and reality. I just gobbled this novel up. I thought it was a joy. New favourite author, there you go, because although I'd seen Max Porter perform, it wasn't until this year that I started to read his work. He's got a new one out, hasn't he? And I can't remember the name of it. No, I can't. But I read Lanny earlier this year, and then you've just heard me rave about Grief is a Thing with Feathers. So yeah, definitely my current favourite. And the next question is, who is your, I think it's your fictional crush. Well, it's not really me. So I've slightly tweaked the question or merged it in with a later question, which is your favourite character that you've read so far this year? And I think Kushla in Louise Kennedy's Trespass is just a wonderful, generously written, warm woman. She's Irish. She's completely caught in the crossfire of the troubles in Northern Ireland. She's a primary school teacher. Her feelings for the children that she teaches, her professionalism, and also her fallibility, really, in getting caught up in a relationship with a much older man. Yeah, I thought she was a lovely, honest, wonderful character. I was lucky enough to meet Louise Kennedy briefly at the Women's Prize, and she is equally a wonderfully warm, just generous, lovely human who can really make you laugh. Yeah. Book that made me cry, got to be Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris, set in Sarajevo during the war there, or the siege of the city in the 1990s, early 90s. And I found the exploration of the siege, the impact it has on, the people who are caught up in it. I loved the fact that the female protagonist is an artist, and there is a scene in there where she's painting a wall with a young girl, and later what happens to that young girl absolutely floored me. Again, beautiful book. Yeah, loved it. Very glad to have read it. And finally, a book that made me happy. And I thought, well, I haven't really read that many happy books, but I don't think that's what the question should involve. I decided to choose a book that made me I felt happy while I was reading it, because it took me back to what it felt like to read when I was a child. And this is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth, I can't remember her first name, Elizabeth Lim. And I loved this story. It's a young girl. She meets a dragon. He appears out of the water. She's very unhappy. Wicked stepmother, and lots of brothers who she deeply cares about, but really frustrate her. And she's involved in this situation where she has to go off on this enormous adventure. She's got special powers. And I just loved it, particularly the scenes with the cranes. The cranes actually are not what they seem. I love the landscapes, I love the setting, I love the encounters, and it just reminds me, and in fact I must do it soon, because I think, for me, often reading teenage fiction, I find it's almost like palate cleansing. It really refreshes my palate, because I get back to that whole sort of excitement that I felt when I first became a really avid, well, I don't really remember not being an avid reader, but that whole feeling as a child when you're just curled up with a book and nothing else matters, nothing else. And you can be called for dinner, you can be called to go and play with your best friend, doesn't matter, you're in that book, and nothing can break through, even the word chocolate or whatever. So yeah, that would be my pick for the book that made me happiest so far in 2023. So there we go. So I hope you enjoyed my ramblings. No, not ramblings. I deliberately didn't call my channel Louise Savage Rambles, even though that is what I'm very good at doing, as you will know. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed my musings. Please let me know in the comments below, you know, what you thought of some of my choices, or you know, any recommendations that you have for things that you've really enjoyed this year, because quite often follow those up. And that's one of the things I love about doing this channel, is all the lovely recommendations and reading advice that I get from all of you. So yeah, please do feel free to let me know what you think. I hope you're out and about doing something very pleasant, or tucked up with a good book. Well, you won't be if you're watching this, but about to be. I'm going to finish my cup of tea now, which I suspect is going, isn't this mug lovely? My sister bought me this last year sometime. It's one of those nice things where she saw me looking at it in a shop. We were doing a little shop together, and she saw me looking at it, and then when we got home, she produced it. I didn't know she'd bought it. She produced it out of a bag. Isn't that nice? It actually sort of matches my outfit too. So I'm going to finish my cup of tea now. So I'll love you and leave you all. Take care, everybody. Bye.